So this is a hunk of greenstone that is slowly on its way to becoming a pecked and ground axe. And I was going to demonstrate block on block, but I don't know how I can do this safely in a circle.
Sorry.
But this would be my block, and when you're doing the block on block, you're not just smashing it randomly. You're using the same principles that I was talking about, below center line, less than 90 degrees. But you're really reefing on this thing, so you know, in this one, the next thing I have to do is, what's the first thing you do?
Find the rock.
Okay. After you find the rock, then you create and straighten the edge. Yep, somebody said that a bunch of times. So here's my edge, and it's good, it's good. Now in here, I've got to straighten all this all the way around to there. Okay, so it's straight, and then right in here, it starts to spread out, especially right there. And so I have to straighten all this, turn all this into an edge, all the way down to there. Okay, so starting in here is what I'm working on. Now there's multiple ways to deal with that, but what I'm basically going to end up doing with this thing is I'm just going to be smashing the damn thing on a rock. Right here is where I'm going to aim at, because it's almost below center line. It's not quite less than 90 degrees, but I'm going to make it less than 90 degrees. And all I'm going to do is just take this thing and smack it on this other rock until a chunk of rock goes flying towards you guys. So I'm going to stop before that actually happens. And this is the kind of thing where you'll, with this type of rock, where you just keep doing it for like 20 minutes and you'll be like, I'm not getting anywhere. And then after 20 minutes, just this big huge chunk of rock will go flying. The other thing that you can do with this is, let's say if I'm napping it. Whoa! I hate this chair. Whose chair is this?
No, you gotta spread the tripod.
Yeah, you gotta make it.
There's inclusions on here.
Hold on a second. Yeah.
What
Part of the biface production is this? Not so smart now, are you? Okay, I'm not liking this chair anymore.
Slowly
Me confused. That's all it opens? Okay, I guess that's...
You have to hit it against the rock.
Oh!
Good Neanderthal chair, man.
Alright, back.
Turn it that way.
There you go. You got it now. Boy, you're a Neanderthal in the high cotton.
So as I'm working... Okay, so as I'm working this thing, if a flake breaks with a rock this hard, I can take the flake, put it right back, like sometimes a flake will break right in half. You can take the flake, put it right back on top of there, sit it on your leg, and just start smashing again, and eventually you'll get it to remove. I don't have, normally when I do this, I have with this stuff, I have 2 pieces of carpet and then my leg pads, because I'm just smashing on my leg for like 20 minutes. And it hurts your leg really bad after just a couple minutes. So, spalling stage.
What would you suggest if you don't have carpet, if you're in the wild? Just
I would get some sphagnum moss, or maybe take my couple pieces of leather and stuff it with with some debris, or you could use a chunk of bark, just anything to absorb the shock a little bit. So for these rocks, these are raw rocks, and these rocks I am at that spalling stage. So when you are assessing your rock, let's go. This one's pretty straightforward. This one, I could work all these edges down and try to get a piece of material from the middle somewhere, but that doesn't seem too likely. So what I'm probably going to do with this is have a bunch of arrowhead-sized flakes, and I'm going to work this like a blade core. Okay, now this is a blade core is what you would use if you wanted something like a scalpel. Okay, that rounded rock that I showed you, it's like it looked like a half of like a rock broken in half. That's a blade core. Could somebody grab me? There's one with a flat top over there. There's a blade core.
this one right here?
No, it's a blade core. It's to your right there. There you go. My obsidian blade core. So instead of working this rock like a biface, what I'm doing with this rock is it's called a blade core. This is the core, and I'm going to be knocking blades off of it. And basically what you're doing with the blade core is you are just trying to get what they call a keel shape. So like a keel like on a boat, you're trying to have these 2 long straight sides that come down, and you're striking off blades that are ready to use tools immediately. You can, man, you can take this art to high levels. I've seen gigantic ones of these that had like a big antler this big and a gigantic lever and a big jig for this huge rock like this long, and they sat the jig up there and they had the antler and they put it in between the lever and the antler and they popped these long flakes off of it like this long and straight. And this is straight up sharper than a razor blade. And basically for these things all you're doing is working your way around the stone and taking off flakes that are ready to use scalpels. Ooh, this one broke in two. So I have this little miniature scalpel, and let me tell you, these things are freaking sharp. Like, they don't look super sharp, but they are sharp, boy, let me tell you what. I mean, this thing is not very good, like the thickness, it's kind of triangular, and it's still super sharp. I mean, that was cutting pretty easily without any tension on the other side of it. Okay? So, generally, ooh, man, that is sharp. So generally, I'll make this blade core, but then I won't touch it until I need a flake. If I need a flake for something, you butcher a whole deer with that. But what I'll do is I'll hold on to the blade core. I won't make 50 blades. I'll just hold on to the blade core, and when I need a blade for something, I'll stop and I'll take off a blade. That axe handle that you saw me using, I created that by burning and taking a flake of that bluestone and just using the flake. And there's this really cool video that Callahan has called Axes and Ade. And they make axes, Pecten ground axes, and then they use axes and Ade, which are flakes, flint flakes, to make bows and arrows out of. It takes them about a day and a half to make the bow and about a day to make the arrow, which is pretty quick.
Matt, what's different about the blade core than your normal rock?
So the blade core is more of like that tri-face kind of idea, but not really, because I'm not working this face at all other than to set it up to make it and keep it flat for the blade cores. Whereas this is a biface. So the reason why I brought it up is because this stone is not going to be very good as a biface, because it's going to take me so long to get to a biface that I'm going to have a small arrowhead just to straighten this thing. So this type of rock I'm going to look at and say blade core. That's what I would use this for right from the beginning. This type of rock is what I'm going to try to remove a flake from and hopefully at some point end up with an arrowhead in there. So as I'm looking at this, my largest section of stone is somewhere in here between my fingers. Somewhere in there might hopefully be an arrowhead, but how do I get to that stage? Well, I got to remove all this other crap that doesn't look like an arrowhead. So I have a lot of options, and what am I going to do? I'm going to go with this. So I'm going to attempt at the widest point of this rock to get a flake from where I was showing you, and so I'm going to try to remove this so that I'm starting to get towards that shape. So I'm going to aim right in here. And this is not going to be a very usable flake. I'll tell you that by looking at it right now. And, ooh, can somebody grab me the gloves? I'm going to need them for this shot. There's a couple gloves over there.
Does the grain give you any indication?
You know, there's only one or two types of rock that have a grain that makes any sort of difference, and this rock doesn't make any difference. It looks like it will, but that's because of if you looked at this rock closely, you can see that there's like ridges and stuff where all these veins of the red rock come out, but that's only after years and years of weathering. It's not going to affect it for knapping much. But you can see by looking at this why I say that the black obsidian is the better, because they're minor, but they're still, you know, impurities. It's not homogeneous. You know what? I don't need the right hand glove, whatever you're doing. So the reason why I'm putting the glove on is because I'm thinking what I'd like to do is get the flake to terminate right in here. But looking at the shape of this ridge, the fact that it's a ridge and it's got that lens shape already to it, I think that the flake is going to end up traveling all the way to the far end of the rock. So, shorter flake, longer flake, somewhere in between. Just something that you start to get used to. Now, there's a third type of blow that you're going to use, and this is going to be more useful for spalling where you're not trying to take a small flake, but more where you're trying to cleave the rock in half. And instead of striking and following through, you're just going to kind of pop the thing. And the difference is when I'm using this, I'm only using like less than about half of the weight of the stone. Whereas when I'm popping it like that, I'm using the full weight of the stone. So I would expect that the flake that comes off is similar in weight to this stone. That makes sense? And you can use your billets like this too. And it might be cool. I'll use the rock.
Boy, you were right.
So that's my starter right there, and that actually helped me out quite a bit. So I had that, and now I've got this. Now this is going to be difficult to get it to be very usable, but if I wanted to, you see where I struck it is up here. If I wanted to, I could try to remove a good bit of that whole ridge. Now I doubt this is going to work very well, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. Okay, this is an explanation of what I was talking about, where the flake travels and breaks it into 3 pieces. Exactly how I was saying. The energy is traveling through, it decides that it wants to turn. Right where the energy turns, it breaks this other piece in half. See that? I got exactly what I was showing that guy. Got my flake that broke, and right where it starts to turn, got that one that broke in half. But I got an arrowhead. Okay, so mission accomplished. Where should we go next? Because we have a lot of options now. I'm going to go in here somewhere, and hopefully I'm going to take a couple flakes off. I'm going to try to do this in a few flakes. And I'm going to start off with this corner over here.
Is that elk?
This is moose.
Moose?
That one's elk, and this one's mule deer, and this one's whitetail. So I've got a little bit of everything.
Wow.
Okay, there's my first one now. I'm trying to... Now I'm going to go for it again and try to cleave this whole bottom half off and leave myself with all of this up here, because I still got a lot of... There should be over there a little piece of a braiding stone, gray. No, not that one. That's the one right there. Sweet. Almost. Just toss it. We'll catch it. Okay, my braiding stone. There's a poster that's sitting in the napping pit that I'll pick up and show to you. And when you're looking at all of these different edges, man, that's pretty rock. When you're looking at all these different corners, there's a certain angle that you're looking for, and I'm not going to bother explaining it, but I'll show you that. And there's a bevel to it. It's not just 2 points that come together. What I'm looking for is, instead of 2 points that come together, where one side turns at the last second, and it's not quite 2 sharp points. It's like a beveled edge, if that makes sense to people. If it doesn't, then you just got to learn what a bevel is. Okay, so I'm hoping that I can remove everything above my fingers with this next strike. But now I'm starting to worry that it's not going to hold together, because as this stone gets smaller, I can't use a really heavy billet because it's going to break it in a bunch of pieces. It's too much energy for that stone to handle. So now I'm kind of skating on thin ice with this next strike, but I'm going to try to pull it off anyway. Damn it. Something happened. That's not good. The flake will probably break into a couple pieces. No, it didn't. Somehow I lucked out. All right, so that was about as perfect as you possibly could have hoped for right there. That was almost too much, but not quite too much. So what I was aiming for was this, all of this, and what I got was a little bit more of the edge. But I'm not complaining, because now I'm starting to have a decent biface come out. So, okay, I'm ready to start turning this into a biface now. And I have an edge here, and that is the only place where there is anything resembling an edge. All the rest is this squared off stuff.
It's an edge because it looks a little serrated, right?
It's an edge because it's sharper than anywhere else. And also, as I'm looking at this stone, I'm choosing that as my edge because that's the widest point. And so I'm going to work towards that widest point instead of working towards this skinnier part at the top. Does that make sense? Because again, remember, half full of water, I'm choosing where that center line is. I get to decide where the center line is. But with the encouragement and the help and the words of the stone, whatever the stone wants to tell me. Wow, look at that gold sheen in there. Whew, that's pretty rock right there.
Does a lot of obsidian have that beautiful color?
If you get into studying before you go to somewhere like Glass Buttes, it'll tell you where to go to get different types of obsidian. Like there's the black is kind of over here, and the gold sheen's there, and the mahogany's here, and the silver sheen's there, and the dacite's over there.
So that is called mahogany.
This is called mahogany obsidian, although this is a mahogany. And there's stuff that's a little different than this that's called a tiger's eye, that's like a little bit more, or tiger stripe, that's a little bit more striped, whereas this is more like kind of blobs and stuff. So now I'm getting into making a lot of debitage. And what I'm going to do is, instead of aiming down into the center of the piece, I'm actually aiming along these square edges to try to remove them. So there's this really cool story in the book Grandfather. And during Grandfather's wanderings, and Grandfather is, he gets this insight, this vision that he needs to give his life to the stones. And he's like, give my life to the stones. What does that mean? What these mean? And he decides at first that he's going to do a vision quest. And he's going to wedge himself between these rocks.
Oh, nice one. Yeah, it is.
There's a sound to it. There's a good sound to it. And you'll start to pick it up when you start flint knapping. You'll notice the sound of a good strike. So he wedges himself in between these rocks. He finds this spot, and he crawls down this cave past all these snakes. And he's laying in between these rocks. And he can't get comfortable, and he can't relax. And he's laying there, and he's trying to just relax and get on with this vision quest and start to understand what this message was that he needed to give his life to the stones. And as he's sitting there, after a while he starts hearing this noise above him. And at first he's like, whatever. And then after a while it's like, it won't stop. It's non-ending. It starts to drive him freaking nuts. And he's just like, I can't handle this anymore. I don't know who's doing this, but somebody's making noise up there, and I got time to stop. So he crawls up out of this hole, and he gets up there, and there's this little kid. He's like tapping on these rocks on top of this butte that Grandfather was on. And he's about to be like, you know, what gives? Why are you doing this? And Coyote Thunder had been following him. I'm pretty sure it was, yes, if I'm getting the story correct. Don't matter. It's not at the meat of the story anyway. So he's talking to Coyote Thunder, who has been following him, and he's like, that's not giving your life to the rocks. You need to give your life to the rocks. Grandfather just doesn't understand what that means at first, so he's like, what the hell, you know, and how do I give my life to the rocks? So he's wandering now. And as he's wandering, it starts to get colder as the sun drops. And it's getting colder and colder still. And now he's like worried about freezing, so he starts to go around and look for stuff to make a fire. He finds a piece of wood that'll work as a spindle, finds a piece that'll work as a fireboard, and then he starts looking around for something to carve the notch. And all the stones that he's picking up are breaking as soon as he picks them up and tries to abrade his notch in. And the moon is coming up, and he catches the glint of something, the glint of moonlight reflecting back at him, and he gets down there, and there's this little tiny flake of obsidian. And he grabs this little flake of obsidian, and he starts working on his stone, and he's getting really cold. He's like frigid cold and shaking. And he's carving on his notch with this tiny little piece of obsidian. And he finally gets his notch, and he gets his fire going. As he's relaxing, he's sitting back by the fire and he realizes that he had just given his life to the stones. That without the help of that flake of obsidian, without the help of those stones, that he wouldn't have survived that night. When you start to work on these skills a little bit more and integrate them into your life a little bit more, there's going to be a lot of lessons that you have the potential to learn. When you're learning from things like spiritual things, there's a lot of symbology involved. And sometimes you feel like you're making stuff up, like you're choosing to look at whatever it is in this way. You're like, I'm making that a symbol. That's not a symbol. It's just I think that it's a symbol. Does it really matter whether it's you thinking it or whether it's the great mystery sending you a message? Because somebody can send you a message and you could totally ignore it. And there's a power in your choice in how you decide to look at something. The same power that's allowing me to look at this rock and say, right there, and allow you to look at this rock and say, I don't know what the hell to do next. That's still just a choice in our perception. You choose to see an obstacle or you choose to see an option. And I'm choosing to see options as much as I possibly can with this stone, with stalking and movement, with shelter, with anything. This is a ballsy option.
Coyote Thunder told him, I said, give your life to the rocks, not die in between them.
There we go.
And then he walked away.
Give your life to the rocks. There's a lot of potential for freedom with these skills. A lot of potential for freedom. And when I say that, I don't just mean like freeing yourself from the shackles of modern life. I'm talking about the freedom to enjoy life a little bit more. The freedom to look at something as an opportunity as opposed to an obstacle. I'm standing around waiting for somebody to come out of the store. I can look around at their landscaping rocks and see if maybe I can score one or two good nappable stones.
Hey Matt, I have a little question.
Yep.
How do the manufactured billets, the copper or the metal ones, fare compared to these? Because I have one, that's why I want to.
The copper billet is going to give you a skinnier,
You have one?
skinnier, thicker flake.
So for blades, they're pretty.
Yeah,
For
does that make
blades.
sense? For
Yeah,
skinnier, thicker flake.
Yeah.
And the obsidian, or the antler is going to give you a wider, thinner flake.
Better, actually. Depending what you're going for, I guess.
Makes a sharper blade.
Do you want me to grab one? Do you want to?
Nah, I don't want to hit this thing with copper. Are you kidding me?
It's not natural.
What time
No,
of
just so
year-
you can show them. That's
What's
what
that?
I meant more so you can show them, not.
Oh, yeah. No, I have, yeah, I'm going to bust one out. Go ahead and grab it, and they'll see what it looks
What
like.
time of year do the deer shed their antlers?
It depends on where you're at, but generally February is when they start to shed.
And they deteriorate on the ground fairly quickly.
They deteriorate if they're really pithy. They're full of a lot of pith. Like this, not this one as much as this one. Like this one is, they'll deteriorate faster. If they're solid, they're not going to deteriorate nearly as quickly. What's that? Just by using it, it's going to be preserved from your oils picking it up, and you're keeping it out of the rain. It'll be fine.
Squirrels and rabbits like to
Yeah.
eat too, don't they?
What is it that's chewing on them?
Squirrels and
Are you sure? How do you know what's chewing
I
on them?
I was just told by someone.
Somebody told me. It's a very honest answer.
You've got some pretty sharp pieces of rock that have come off there. Would you use those?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All of those are potential tools.
Okay.
I'm just I'm just trying to get this to a stage 2 biface right now, just so you guys can really get a good feel for the process. So I'm mostly there. I just have this big chunk to deal with and this chunk to deal with. And this chunk I'm going to deal with like this, by working down that edge. Now I know that I told you guys that your strike looks exactly the same every time, and you guys are seeing me strike this thing like probably 5 or 6 different ways. But for learning purposes, I really highly recommend that you strike it just one way.
When would you use a marker pen? Or
At any point, like for right now, I'd take my grease pen and I would say, and I would draw, okay, right here is what I'm trying to remove.
draw the ridge?
Draw the whole flake. Don't just draw the ridge. So this is a...
It's like copper.
Is that copper? That's,
Stainless
don't
copper.
look like copy. Stainless copper.
The handle of it is, and then the tip is stainless steel synthetic.
Don't want to hit it with some stainless steel synthetic, but that's what your copper billets are gonna end up looking like. Only they're gonna be copper colored rather than stainless steel colored. Did you make that yourself?
Maybe.
Don't remember. He made the money.
in an adult bookstore?
What? Adult bookstore. You guys.
You guys!
Been out in the
Cry on my primitive pillow. Dear hair absorbs tear really good.
Well, then I'm taking this back.
Right now, I'm working down, instead of working towards the center, I'm working down the edge. Ooh, just cut myself. I'm working down the edge instead of working it. I'll braid right quick. Yeah, I'm not sending flakes down this way right now. I'm trying to send flakes down here and remove that thick spot with each flake that I take.
And why do you braid it?
To sturdy up the edge. To make it, as if I leave it really brittle, then when I hit it, it's just going to crumble.
How does that work though? Changes the vibration.
Oh, because you're just going to take tiny little flakes off.
Okay? I don't know how to demonstrate this, but see, it's so thin that when I strike it, it just crumbles and takes off a tiny little flake, whereas opposed to over here, where it's sturdy enough that when I strike it, it actually sends a flake somewhere.
So if you leave little bits on, then the next time you strike it, they're
It's
going to
gonna
vibrate and break things
Yeah, well,
around
imagine that I want to remove like all of this with a strike, okay? I need the energy to travel this far. If it's so crumbly that it can't sustain any of that energy, then it breaks and the energy doesn't travel anywhere because this rock isn't strong enough to sustain it.
So the weak parts actually dilute the power.
Well, yeah, it's like, yeah, basically, I mean, if it's not, it needs to be able to hold up to a certain amount of force. Otherwise, you can't get the energy to travel. As soon as that energy gets into a place where it can't, where it's either too thin. If it's really thin, the energy is trying to get out of the rock. That's basically what's happening, is the energy is trying to leave the rock as quickly as possible. And you're sturdying up the edge, you're containing that rock, that energy in the rock for longer, because it's strong enough to sustain it. Does that make sense?
So you're sending it down the ridge line, that energy?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm trying to. I'm eventually. Okay, you notice how I'm taking, right now what I'm aiming to do is take this all off, but you notice how I'm not striking it there just yet? What I'm doing is called preparing the platform. This is one thing that I forgot to write up there that you will run into, and that is a very good term to know. It's the platform. The platform is the place where you strike the rock. That's all it means. But there's like a science to it. And what I'm doing now with all this extra striking is preparing the platform. I'm giving it the right shape, the right thickness, and aligning it towards this ridge so that I can strike it. And abrading it is part of preparing the platform. I'm just, all these extra strikes that I'm doing that are all off to the side is all designed to sturdy up the rock and to expose that platform as best I can. So this is all preparing the platform.
Is that the beveled edge you mentioned?
Yep, I'm creating that beveled edge, creating that curve to it. But remember I said that it wants to travel on a ridge, so this is pretty flat here. So now I'm trying to take this away so that I leave myself with just a ridge that I'll then remove. So, see if I can get this all to work.
What did you use to make your billets round? Like the abrading stone?
Yeah, I just used a piece of abrading stone and just like cut them to rough shape so that they were I cut them kind of rounded, you know, like sawed off all the rosette and cut them to like roughly shape and then ground them down.
And do you use both ends? Because I see both ends are...
I have on this one. This is the only one that I've used both ends on. Crumbled a little bit. I missed that ridge a little bit, but it's alright. I thinned out the piece a little bit more, so. There's a little more thinning going on this than you might have with a normal stage 2, but it's the only way for me to remove some of this junk.
It's all tone based, right?
What do you mean?
You're listening to the sound a lot.
No, I'm looking a lot too. I just have done it enough to know what I'm looking for too, so it makes it a lot easier for me to just glance at this thing and see what I need to do. Now, know how I was saying that you're thinning and reducing, shaping and making symmetrical all at the same time? One lends to the other. You kind of, it works itself out. Like I want this to be pretty straight, but in the long run it's going to be round because of the physics of how I remove one flake. It lends itself towards making the whole thing lens shape. As I strike it, I'm giving it that lens shape. It just naturally happens. But you can also make it like a turtleback, or you know, like a little mountain. So this is mostly to a stage 2 at this point. I got a nice clean straight edge that I'm almost done straightening.
Is that the edge you're talking about?
The bevel,
Where's the edge that you...
right there.
Oh, okay. Oh, straight.
Trying to
Oh,
keep
okay.
it straight. Other good thing about abrading is you braid the edge and it really points it out to you. So preferably, you see how it's a lot of variation in that white line? I'm eventually trying to get it to be completely straight. I'm not quite there yet. So this will be like the last strike on this particular area of the stone. Woo! Come on. I know it wants to release, it's just not doing it. Come on, I know you want to release. Too much. But it worked out. Worked out really well. Worked out perfectly.
Follow because of that ridge.
Yep. Traveled all the way down the ridge and stopped right there. So it actually turned out pretty good, because that was the bulk of the issue on this side. So you guys are bringing me luck today. Last class they were messing me up. Well, I'm doing it for you, not for me. So anything we mess up is all your fault, not mine. Something you needed to learn. Why did you need to learn that? I don't know. For what? Yeah, I wouldn't use this for much chopping, but if you leave it a little bit thicker, it's great as a piercing tool, as a knife blade, as a spear point, as an arrowhead. It'll still work, but you know, it's surprisingly strong, but I wouldn't be chopping with it, because
We only make,
when I what's that?
you'll only ever make things that never past a certain size of the city.
No, you can make them past a larger size. It's just how are you using it. Imagine that when I sharpen this down to a point, it's a platform. It's less than 90 degrees. If I strike it to one side or the other, you know, it could be below center line. I'm basically creating a platform. this stuff is not quite strong enough for me to be chopping into wood with. What am I going to do? I'm going to send a flake off of it when I strike the wood. Whereas something like that greenstone, this ain't breaking on a piece of wood. It's just not happening. So it might be a platform shape, but what I'm chopping it with isn't strong enough to break it. If that makes sense. But this stuff can pierce through bone if it's got the right lens shape to the end. If it's really perfectly lens shaped, it can puncture through bone real easy. I've seen it happen before. I'm almost at a biface stage with this. So when I get to that biface stage, I'll stop. But I just want to point out the fact that not only is this skill super, super addicting and fun. Sounded like somebody speaking from, making a noise from experience.
I didn't know. I didn't know when I started.
Addicting even watching you do it.
But it really changes the way you think about things. It's giving you a different spatial relationship with the stone, with everything you're doing. Because you're looking at the way energy moves through something. It's interesting that, I was talking about an animal being an instrument played by the landscape. And the animal, the person who's stalking skillfully, is allowing themselves to be moved by the landscape or moved through the landscape in a certain way. And there's a lot of parallels to the way that this energy is traveling through the rock. Because a lot of times, when you're moving through the woods, there's only one or two certain ways that you can do it silently. Unless you turn it and look at it a different way. There's only one place I can strike the rock, if I'm going towards the center of it. But maybe I don't have to worry about going towards the center right now, and if I look at it this way, then I can take a flake and get through what I'm trying to get through by taking a different perspective. Now maybe for the stalking and movement, that means that instead of looking at the forest and seeing the tree trunks, you're seeing the space between the trees. And you start to looking for that empty space. And I'm looking at this rock. I'm not just looking at the rock that's there. I'm looking for what it's going to look like when I remove that stone. What does the inside of that rock look? What does the arrowhead that's not there yet? What does that look like? Constantly changing my perspective. As the rock changes, as the flakes get removed, the finished product changes. I'm not trying to stay rigid with it and always do it one particular way. Trying to be as fluid as I can with it. And always be listening to the stone, watching how it breaks, how it reacts. One, two more. I'm gonna call her a biface. I don't like that. All of these strikes are to prepare that platform and to create that bevel.
Are you still straightening, or are you thinning?
I
at the
am.
same time?
All of this right now that was all platform preparation for this one strike. I'm still straightening the edge, and now I'm thinning a little bit as I straighten this last bit. Woo! Preferable. Didn't travel. That one did. Perfect. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with the straightness of this edge now. I don't have any big, huge chunks sticking off in any place. I have a lot of issues to still deal with, but this is beyond a stage 2 now. I probably shouldn't have taken that last strike, but I couldn't resist, and I still got a decent lens shape. Now I got a little bit of dip in there. Is there any questions on this process, how this all works? Okay, this will be a lifelong pursuit if you're trying to get anything decent at it, because once you start, you're not going to be able to just put it down and never pick up a rock again. But even though you want to be treating all your rocks as though they're precious resources, don't be afraid to break the rocks a little bit. You're going to make gravel. Okay, there's the most expert flint knappers in the world still make a whole bunch of gravel. Callahan and one of his buddies decided to do a test of how long it would take people to go from being novices who had never picked up a stone or a billet or anything before to becoming a proficient flint knapper. Proficient meaning I see the rock, I think that I want it to turn it into an arrowhead, and I can make it into an arrowhead, you know, at least half of the time. And what it took was about 120 pounds of rock. So that means you pick up a 30-pound boulder and you reduce it to, you got this bigger flake. Off of that you knock a couple flakes. That means that after 100 pounds using all the flakes, using every usable flake, and if you picked up every usable knappable flake, you know what I mean, then by the end of your 100 pounds you would be proficient with it. You would be able to pick up a stone and turn it into what you wanted to turn it into. So 100 pounds of rock isn't that much. It's just the question of, are you going to make the time? Is you going to make it important enough to you? Yeah.
Well, the rock, what I collect is from the beach. It's got a lot of kind of crust on the outside, and I've tried it, and it's really difficult to kind of break off. In doing that, am I damaging the rock in the center?
No, most of the times you're not. That's called the oh God, why am I brain farting? Totally. Cortex. The cortex of the stone. If you're talking about like a, you're talking about like a flint, like a true flint, right?
Yeah.
And it's in a limestone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that limestone won't. The energy just dissipates right through it. So if you're striking it, you're not generally putting too much energy into the stone. Are they big round cobbles?
No, I've been looking for great big pieces. They're kind of like sort of fist size to kind of 2 fists.
But rounded or?
Yeah, rounded and quite flat.
Okay. If they, oh yeah, so tabs, like tabs or pancakes or something like that. Most of the time, what I'll do if it's really rounded on all the edges is I'll just tip it way up and smack off the entire side, and it leaves you with a square edge, but at each side of that square edge it pinches down to a little point, and there's your entryway into the rock. That makes sense. It's a good question. Any other questions about all this? So you guys have like a 15-minute break or so, however long Jorge wants you to have a break for before we get into the next.
Great job, man. Awesome.
Thank you. See if I can complete this through the week.
So what did you say you were going to use?
What, this? I'm hoping that I can get like a nice spear point out of it, something a little bit larger than an arrowhead. I have a good opportunity to.